Well, hello. I am super excited about today. I have I say a good friend. I don't know if you say the same thing, but a man that I honor so much. His name's Richie Allen. Many of you who follow me probably know exactly who he is. Such an incredible man. And today we're going to be talking about the loss of his wife, and now he's taking care of kids literally by himself. And we're also going to discuss something a little bit controversial, which is church hurt, and really how to get through that, and really how to handle it, because we know that almost every single person deals with that. And so let's get into it. Awesome. Well, Richie Allen, thank you so much. He's drinking water. It's good.
Oh
Thank you
yeah,
so much for joining. How are you doing?
man, I'm doing pretty good. Today I'm probably going to be talking out of both sides of my mouth. No, let me explain. Let me explain. I said before the show that I went to the dentist this morning, and I was expecting just a routine situation, and it was not routine. Apparently, there was two cavities that have just like gone and exploded in my in my mouth, and
Yeah.
so he had to do like he said in a month it would have been two root canals, and
Yeah.
so he got it, but he completely numbed my face. So this
Yes.
side of my face is numb, and
So
so
good.
I'll be doing this during the conversation. I'm gonna hold up my lip while we're while
Listen,
we're
listen.
talking.
It makes this so much better, to be real honest with you. So,
Oh yeah,
well,
see, so I'm not smirking. I promise, I'm not smirking. It's not a
no,
smirk.
it's good. That's good. No, it's
See?
so good. Well, I met you at the 429, and
Oh man.
an amazing ministry back in the day. My life was changed at it, and just I kind of was always inspired by you. You didn't know who I was for probably the first 3 or 4 years that I kind of had followed you. I saw you do a little bit of work with Israel Houghton, and just really seeing you. And one thing that always inspired me was just how much you loved your wife and what you did to support your kids, and all you're always like, you were like literally you are the perfect family man, right? The man that just um
Well,
for
that's
real,
not.
like.
You,
And
you're just
so
you need to aim higher, Kyle.
I guess. But you were always the one also that you were building websites. I remember I called you once asking you some advice on building websites. And really, I just felt like, because I was in this digital space, and, I was having a ministry of my own, you were really someone that I always kind of stood back and watched. And you were going to start your own church with your wife. And, my wife and I ended up really getting to know you at that point of, when we started coming to your home groups, where my wife and I simply
Mhm.
said, man, when we were at that house, and you and your wife were just leading this, just really with no other ulterior motive other than just to come and love Jesus. I mean, you rarely talked to
Yeah.
you. I only think I heard you one time talk about a church plant. I don't think, I heard you one time talking about strategy of how to grow the church. It was literally about loving Jesus, and obviously your wife, which I'm going to let you get into here in a second, recently passed away from cancer. And just watching you through that entire process, man. I mean, your doctors are saying, hey, she doesn't have, 24 hours. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's funny. We're going to keep praying. And she freaking lived, like
Yeah.
she literally, like after
Yeah.
you did that video where you're like, oh my
Absolutely,
gosh, like
man.
this is the end, your wife lived. And I'm going to tell you, that was the first miracle that I had seen with my own eyes. 100%,
Hmm.
just how God gave you
Wow.
just enough more time for you and your family. So I want you to kind of talk to us about, man, I know that there's some people that are going to be watching this podcast that, maybe going through some hell in their life, right? Maybe it is directly
Yeah.
cancer that they're dealing with. But I really want you to kind of share your thoughts on that, and like what you were going through. And now that we're kind of out of this, where it's not as deep into it. Yeah, I
Right.
really do want to know your thoughts on it, and really just encouragement of someone that's going through it. What was your mentality through that, and how a lot of people say, I don't mean to keep talking, but a lot of people say, man, I trust God. But Richie, I watched you actually live that. And so, yeah, so talk to me about that.
Well, man, geez, yeah, I feel like you're talking to somebody else. This is
Yeah.
the, so I guess the short story is, oh, you know what? Watch this. You're gonna love that I'm walking away from the camera. Watch this. Hold on one second. I got to get something.
Okay,
It's right over here. It's
I'm
part of the story.
excited.
Hold on.
I'm excited about this. And if you're watching right now, I want to tell you, hey, follow, share, follow Richie as well. Share this podcast. If you're watching this,
Okay,
share as well. But go ahead.
I got it. I got it. So see this?
The Rock.
There's a story. There's a story behind that. So I'll share that in just a minute. Um, Short version is back in 2018. I had open heart surgery. We didn't. I didn't have a heart attack, but it was very close. My dad had died at 51. His dad had died at 50, and I inherited the genes, and so I had open heart surgery. 6 months later, Heaven was leading worship, and she was still taking care of me. 6 weeks later, I think it was, and she tore her ACL completely tore, so she had to get in to have surgery. A little bit later that year, she found out that she had breast cancer, and it was something that we weren't expecting. It was a very rare kind of breast cancer that is resistant to chemo and radiation, and she had a partial mastectomy. They thought they got it all, and we were good for a year and a half. And then in 2021, in August, she started having some major pain. We were doing 75 hard. Have you ever tried 75 hard?
No, I don't do that stuff.
It's hard.
Because it's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard, you know?
It is. And so we were doing it together, and she started having a lot of pain in her back. She thought she just messed it up, and from the exercise, and and then she got to the point where she was literally just screaming in the room when she would try to move, and I would have to pick her up and take her to the restroom and all this stuff, and the whole time just screaming. Finally, we went to the emergency room 3 times, found out that the cancer had come back. It had metastasized into her spine, broken her L4, and and just continued to grow from there. And so for the last, since August, September of 21, all the way through last year, we tried chemo, we tried all kinds of things, and she passed away in October 22nd of 2022, 6 months ago, just a few days ago, marked 6 months. But in that process, man, we had a choice, right? We always have a choice, and I think the way that God, we have a lot more control over things in our life than we think we do.
Right.
I think when it comes to church culture, sometimes we put everything on God, and we say, well, if God wills, then this will happen. If whatever, those kinds of things, we kind of get to be lazy Christians, honestly, because we put it all on God, and there's a lot of responsibility that we have in our own lives, and one of the things that we're responsible for is how we react to situations,
Right.
and for us, we had a choice. We were like, okay, how are we gonna walk this road? We don't know whether or not we're gonna see healing,
Right.
but we're gonna choose to believe, and that's the faith
Right.
part. And then
Right.
we're also gonna choose to trust, which is the dark side of faith. Trust is the dark side of faith. That's
Yeah.
when, if not, that's the three Hebrew children, right? When you look at the
Right.
three Hebrew children, and they say, we believe that he will deliver us from the fire, but if not,
Right.
we still know that he can.
Right.
And so we just made that decision. Heaven made the decision too. She was like, you know what? I'm going to do everything that I can. I'm going to fight
Right.
this with everything that I can. I'm going to trust God to do whatever he needs to do in this
Right.
situation. And we're going to walk through this together. We're going to do it as well as we can with our children. We're going to help them
Right.
we're going to walk with them and be very open with them. And so we were. She had surgery on her spine, and then another surgery to remove as much of the tumor as they could. Initially, that was back in September of 21, and there were multiple surgeries. She had staph. She had staph infection, all kinds of stuff that went on. So there were tons of surgeries. And in January, of 2022, she, I was gone, working at a coffee shop down the road, and she was resting, and I tried to call her. She didn't answer. It I thought, okay, I'm gonna leave her alone. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I still got no response, and I was like, okay, something's not right. So I run to the house. She's unresponsive, and she had gone septic, and they
Mm,
took her to the hospital. Her fever maxed out at 105.9 or something like that. So we don't know how high it was. Took her to the hospital. She couldn't speak. It was she was literally unresponsive for several days,
yeah.
and then we thought it was getting better. Doctor came in and said, "I think it's time for you to call in the family." And we were like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, hold on just a second." She was just being able to talk a little bit,
Right.
and he said, "There's nothing else we can do. We've done everything we can do. Uh, it's in God's hands now." And I was like, "Well, man, that's the best place for it to be. Like, if it's going to
Yeah.
be in anybody's hands, God's hands is the best place."
Yeah.
And and we had and I had a moment where I said, "Okay, he said, literally, we're looking at 12 hours at a time," is what he said. He said, "So she could die within the next 12 hours." So I made a couple calls to some people that I trust, and asked a little bit for prayer and some counsel. But then I immediately jumped on social media, and we had walked this journey with people on social media, just because we felt like if God does something, it's going to build faith. And if he doesn't, then at least we tried, right?
Right.
We trusted God. And so people started praying, man. It was the weirdest thing. In literally just like that,
Yeah.
in 7 hours, everything changed. She went from they
So
couldn't they
good.
couldn't intubate her, none of it, uh, to they said she can't go to sleep. If she goes to sleep, anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Bottom line is, 7 hours later, everything shifted, and within 7 days of that moment, she walked back into the house on her own, and absolutely miraculous, no question, no question. It was a
Right.
miracle, and in the process of recovery, I got this for her, and this is a rock. I got
Right.
I got it for her because it reminded me of this was a gift that I got her. It reminded me of this, and I told the kids this. We put this on the bed with heaven, and brought the kids in and said, "Hey, you know what? This stone with the children of Israel, when they crossed over Jordan, they picked up stones and they built a memorial on the other side of the Jordan River, right? After the miracle happened, they did it so that the Bible says, so that when the next generation would walk by and they say, "What meaneth these stones? What do these stones mean?" Then the parents and the grandparents could say, "This is a reminder of what God did in the past." And no matter whatever happens in the future, we have these stones that
Right.
remind us that God did do it. And so we will keep this forever. I keep it on my right here in the living room in front of everybody to see it, because it's a reminder that God did do what he said he would do. And we know that he can. He chose not to heal her again, and well, in his own way, he healed her. He healed her there, not here. But
Right.
we always have this to look back at and say, you know what? We know God can. And as he's sovereign, he can do whatever he wants, and he can choose not to do whatever he wants. He didn't do it the way we would want him to do it, but I know he can. I have absolutely no doubt
Right.
that he can.
Right.
And my wife did as well. And so we just kind of, in this process, we just learned to understand, to look at the little things, and look at the things where God shows up in the little details, and say, you know what? We know one thing. If there's nothing else that we know, my Heaven was studying a book called All the Women of the Bible, and she was so intrigued by Hagar and the story of Hagar, and the fact that she was cast out of Abraham and Sarah's house, because
Right.
he tried to start something that God wasn't ready to start yet,
Right.
and they had Ishmael through Hagar, and then she was thrown out in shame. And so she's out in the desert, and she's the first person in the Bible to ever name God.
Right.
And she names God Adonai El Roy, which is God who sees me, the God who
Right.
sees me, because you
Right.
see me. And so heaven wrote that on her mirror. I still have it in the mirror, on the mirror in our bathroom. We haven't taken it down, but it says Adonai El Roy, and it says you see me.
Yeah.
And if there is nothing else that you get whenever you go through situations like this and you see the hand of God in it, but it doesn't turn out the way you want it to turn out, you have to know that God sees you. And he shows up more as the God who sees me, and Emmanuel, the God who is
Right.
with me, than he does in any other situation. Yes, he can heal. Yes, he can deliver. Yes, he can save. Yes, he can do all these things. But his specialty is being the God who sees me and the God who is with me. Because
Right.
that's all he wanted from the very beginning with Adam.
Right.
I want to walk with you in the cool of the evening. All he wants to do is be with us, and for
Right.
us to want that from him.
Right.
And so for us, that's really how we walked through this situation. And it's like a shortened, condensed of a year and a half,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's how we walked through this situation. And did we have times of scare, being afraid? Absolutely. We have times of saying, God, where are you? Absolutely, we did, and over again. But it was a
Yeah.
daily decision to say, you know what, we don't understand, but we trust you,
Yeah.
and we know you see us, and we know you're walking with us in the
Yeah.
middle of all of it.
Yeah.
So, and he did all the way, man, and he still
Yeah.
does every day.
And whenever I was at the funeral, I was just sitting in the back, and I kind of like had a, between people could see you and your kids. And what I thought was incredible, man, is just like, your kids knew what to do. They worshiped through the entire funeral, right? And you held them, and there was crying, right? But I will
Mhm.
tell you what I saw more than anything with you and your children was a sovereign joy. A we know what we're doing. We're praying, we're worshiping, and your kids just seeing them crying while they're worshiping, but just knowing that they, I really felt the presence of God. And that's
Well,
one thing
man,
that I struggled. Yeah.
yeah, no, go ahead and finish what you were about to
Well,
say.
I was going to say, I struggled a lot with, back in the day, I grew up extreme Baptist, right? I went to Fundamental Baptist Church, and I really didn't know how to process healings. And whenever I started going to Guatemala, and the pastors there would ask me to pray for someone who had cancer, I would kind of pray with this mindset of like, okay, I don't know if this is really going to work, but like I would kind of just like barely get into it. And my mind has really shifted a lot of where I'm at now, as I believe that, man, we have a sovereign God. And I
Mhm,
don't, for me, I'm going to pray, and I'm going to believe with every ounce inside of me that God can and will heal. Right. But
mhm,
ultimately, where my mindset is it's unto his will. Right. Like that's what I've always said is like, God,
mhm,
you know, whatever situation happens, right? No matter what hell I go through, even if she
mhm.
dies, that does not mean that you failed me. And that does not
No.
mean that, you are, I mean, obviously we know that he's going to work good through that. Obviously my parents died, right? My mom died when I was 13 years old. And, I struggled with that because I'm like, man, here's this God that I hear everyone around me praying. And this is where I want you to clarify for people that are out there with the same mentality that, man,
Yeah.
I hear believers saying that God, it's your will for them to live. God, you can heal, and God, you want us to be joyful, but yet we still see things like this happen. How do you walk someone through? Because you are a living testimony of it, right? How do you walk somebody who is skeptical about the whole Jesus thing simply because of the idea of, okay, we say that God is good. We say that God only wants the best for us. We know that God can heal. We've seen him heal other people, but why did my wife have to die? Right? Like, what is your
Yeah.
response to something like that, really quick?
Well, man, I mean, first of all, you have to we we have to understand this, and this is a primary thing to understand, is that we live in a broken world. Um, as a kid, for my children to go through what they're going through, and what they went through, what they're still going through, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see it happen. What I told our family members and the people that were close to us whenever we knew that it was getting dire, and what Heaven and I both told them was, never tell our children that it was the will of God
Right.
for their mom to die,
Right.
because it wasn't. It's not his will for her to die. Does he make it work in his plan? Absolutely. But it
Right.
wasn't his
Yeah.
will. It hurts him to see her hurting. And it hurts him to see any of us when we are hurting, just like it hurts me to watch my kids hurt. It hurts God to see us hurt. But w- why do we paint God in a corner and assume that he is supposed to be a genie in a bottle to do everything
Right.
that we want him to do?
Right.
The the struggle is, there are not the struggle, the thing is, from the foundation of the earth, God set forth laws and rules that are in effect universal truths. They're universal truths, whether you're a believer or not. If you abide by those universal truths, you're blessed. If you
Right.
don't, you see the results of that. You reap what you sow. That reaping what you sow. That's one of the universal truths. Uh,
Right.
Generosity is a universal truth. When you give, it will return back to you. There's a lot of these universal truths that God set up from the foundation of the earth, and when something is violated in that, it breaks the covenant. It breaks the
Right.
thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be me. All right, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily that my wife didn't do something right that caused her to die. That's not what I'm saying. But I
Right.
am
Right. Right.
saying Adam did it, and then other people down the line, and it could have been a father, it could have been a grandfather. I don't necessarily believe in generational curses, like as to the level
Right.
that a lot of people do, but I think that what we have to understand is there are consequences to things. We live in a culture right now where we eat processed food, and we have poison that we put in our bodies on a daily basis. How is that not going to affect health? It is
Right.
going to affect health. It's
Right.
going to. And we're going to have to deal with the consequences of the
Love
brokenness
that.
of the world. We have to deal with that. The
Right.
the question is, will God heal us? Yes, he can. Will he? Not necessarily. And God, he this is what I believe. Okay. So take it with a grain of salt. But what I believe is that God will not interject himself into every situation that we want him to interject himself into. And when he does choose to do it, it is always for a greater purpose. It is not just for our benefit.
Right.
And I know he's a personal
Right.
God, and he's a friend and all of that stuff, but he is also Lord, and he's sovereign. And when we have a sovereign God that makes choices and allows certain things, he allows them. He doesn't choose them, but he allows them because we chose them, or humanity chose to do the things
Yeah.
that bring us to that point. Um, he still shows up as God who sees us and the God who's with us.
Yeah.
He doesn't always show up as the healer. Just because he can heal doesn't mean he's going to. Just
Right.
because he can deliver doesn't mean he's going to. Just
Yeah.
because he can provide doesn't mean he's going to. But
Yeah.
he's always going to be there. And
Yeah.
so for me, that's I think that's a big
Yeah.
part of walking through a situation like this, and trying to you have to reconcile in your head, because a lot of religious people. I grew up in an organization that was very different than Baptist, in that we believed in healing,
Right.
so much so that if you didn't get healed, a lot of
It was
people
your
said, "Well,
problem.
it's your fault." Right?
Yeah.
It's your
Yeah.
fault. You,
Yeah.
you didn't have enough faith. You didn't have enough faith. No, that's not true either. It's
Yeah.
not true either. It doesn't. Now it says, according to your faith, be it unto you. But I don't think I think that's
Yeah.
taken out of context. And there's a lot of things that are taken out of context in the scripture, and God healing just because we ask him to do so. I think
Right.
that's out of context. He's sovereign. He's going to do it. If he
Yeah.
does it, he's going to do it for a much larger purpose. You
Yeah.
might be a beneficiary of it, but it wasn't just for you.
Yeah.
And if he chooses not to, and he lets lets us suffer the consequences of the broken world and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. He's always going to be with us, but he's also going to use that for greater good in
Yeah.
the future and for a much bigger picture that goes way beyond our own lifespan.
So I think the exact same way. I have struggled with it for so long. But one thing that I've always said is 100%, you know, where I stand is number one is Proverbs 3:5, right? Like, do not lean on your own understanding, right? I cannot,
Mhm.
my 5-year-old little girl, I can try my best to explain to her why certain things are the way that they are, why we do certain things, right? Like, why do we turn on a freaking blinker when we drive? She doesn't
Right.
understand the reason why now. And she
Right.
doesn't necessarily care because she hasn't even experienced that part of her life where a blinker has anything to do with her, right? And so
Right.
for me, I've always said, we as humans can do our best to try to understand every thought process behind of what the Lord is doing, but ultimately for me, I think sometimes it just confuses the believers even more. And for me, I tell believers, number one, we've got to sit back and we've got to simply say that one thing, right? Like, lean not on your own understanding. You may not ever be able to fully understand. I don't know why my mom died. I don't know why. I don't get it.
Mm-mm.
But what I will tell you is this: is I've met over 82 teenagers who have lost their mom when they were 13, their mom or their dad at the age while that student was 13 years old.
Yep.
So, and I don't believe that. There's no way in heck that could be a coincidence, right?
Hmm.
I know this at my mom's funeral. I had 5 ladies come up to me while they were burying my mom, literally saying, "We're addicted to drugs. We know this is why your mom died, and we're no longer going to do it." And I know all 5 of these women today are 100% clean from the day that my mom when her
Bro.
funeral happened, right? So for me, I don't walk around anymore, wishing, and here's the craziest thing too, is somebody asked me the other day, a student while I was preaching, said, "Do you wish that it would have changed and that, maybe your mom still would have been living?" And it was such a hard question for me to answer because I genuinely was in this place of like, of course I want my mom alive. Like, of course I want my
Yeah.
children to know her. Of course, when I got married, I would have loved to see her sitting down watching, right? But I don't want to change God's plan because look what has been done because of that. Like, I don't even know if I
Yeah.
would have been a believer as strong as I am today if it weren't because of my mom's death. I know that sounds super crazy to think,
No, no,
you
it
know,
it doesn't it doesn't, bro. Like my dad died at 50, right?
right,
I was older than you, but I was 23, 24 years old. He was my best friend in the whole world, and he was my pastor, and I loved my dad. How many times have I thought, man, I wish my dad was still alive to see my grandkid, to see his grandkids, to be there when I got married,
yeah,
to know heaven. He didn't even know heaven very well at
right,
all
right,
before that happened, and it's like my whole life though, if he had not passed, my life would not look anything like it does right now. And
yeah,
more than likely would not have been able to to minister to the people that I've ministered to through that stuff and through the other things. And y- you can trust in the Lord with all thine
right,
heart, lean
right,
not to
right.
thine own understanding,
Understanding,
in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So
right,
when you lean not to your understanding, you go, God, I don't understand,
right,
but I trust you.
right,
Then when you acknowledge that his hand is still in your life, then he says he will direct your paths. And he's
yeah,
going to take your path even through the moments of lost faith, but we're still trusting. He's going to direct your path into something that's so much greater than you could have
yeah,
had, even with this charmed life that we all
yeah,
wish we had.
right,
It is precisely through our brokenness
yeah,
that others can be made whole. This is what's always interesting to me is that you can speak from a wound or you can speak through a wound. Okay,
yeah,
and we'll talk about that when it comes to church hurt too. But you can speak from a wound or you can speak through it. And speaking through a wound is when you allow the wound to teach you something, and
yeah,
you learn, and you can pass that on to other
yeah,
people.
yeah,
Ultimately, man, it is our brokenness that makes God God.
yeah,
And that's why our brokenness and our pain and our trauma and all the stuff and our addictions and all the things, all of our wrongs and everything, they're gifts because they allow God to be Lord.
Yeah.
In my weakness, he is made strong.
Yeah.
If I have a charmed life, I don't need him. And we've heard that preached over and over again.
Right.
But man,
Right. Right. Right.
when you live it, it's a whole different thing. I
Yeah.
don't need God when everything is going good. In
Yeah.
fact, the first episode of my podcast, Make Peace with War, uh, I um, I interviewed my wife, and we were in Tijuana while she was getting alternative treatments, trying to like 3 months before she died. And I interviewed her, and one of the things that she said is sometimes we're better in the battle,
Yeah.
and it just blew that just like hit me super strong.
Right.
No, we are better in the battle because we
Yeah.
are leaning on God.
Yeah.
When we're not in a
Yeah.
battle, we can lean on our own understanding.
Right.
This is where trust comes in, where we
Yeah.
can't lean on it because we don't
Yeah.
have anything to lean on. So we have to
Right.
lean on Him, and it's always going to work out better. You know what David
Yeah.
said? This is the thing one of the things that David said. David was man after God's own heart. God loved David, man, and
Right.
he was all over the map, dude. He was up and down
Right.
emotionally all the time. You know all the
Yeah.
things. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
he's a murderer. He's a rapist. He was
Right. Right.
like all of these things, but he always knew where to turn.
Right.
He would make stupid mistakes. He would say stupid things. He would get super depressed, but then he would say, "But I trust you." Right.
Yeah.
And this is what he said one time. He said, um, make me to hear joy and gladness, that
Right.
the bones that thou hast broken may rejoice.
Yeah.
Man, when you look at that scripture, you realize this. He said, the bones that thou hast broken. He's saying, God, you allowed this, right?
Yeah.
You allowed these things, but help me to hear, make me to hear joy and gladness so that I can rejoice in them. And
Right.
so what he's saying there is that in every single situation that we have in our lives, whether it be traumatic, whether it be abuse, whether it be loss, whether it be financial ruin, whatever it is, every situation, there is joy and gladness to be found in it,
Yeah.
in every single situation,
Yeah.
because that's a frequency that we have to tune our spirits to. And that's
Right.
what David was, he was recognizing. Joy and gladness is everywhere, and it's all around, and it's always available to us no matter what we're
Right.
going through. But we have to tune our ears, our spiritual ears, our heart's ears to that frequency so I
Yeah.
can hear the joy and gladness, so I can rejoice in the
Right.
midst of my suffering that God allowed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key to walking through. And I'm the first to tell you, Heaven and I were not perfect in how we walked through this, and we weren't. We had days.
Yeah.
We just had lots of days, but I can tell you this, man, is that joy and gladness is available. One of the things I remember, I'm in my living room right now, and Heaven was in hospice. We had in-home hospice for the last month of her life, and she was in there in the bedroom in her hospital bed. I was in the kitchen, and one night, and I just felt this heavy, just weight of panic and anxiety and like deep depression, just going, what is going to happen? Like, I have no idea what's going to happen. She's probably going to die. I mean, that's where my
Yeah.
head was like, she's going to die. What am I going to do? What are my kids going to do? What am I going to do?
Right.
How is she feeling? You know what, how
Right.
is she processing all of this stuff? And, and I started to say this one little, like a breath prayer that I just made up. And it was, this is my reality. This is what I have been gifted, and I am
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah.
And I said that over and over and over again. And the more that I said it, the more that this cloud lifted off of me. And
Yeah.
every day, I would have to stop and say, this is my reality. This is what I've been
Yeah.
gifted, and I'm grateful. Where we are, no matter how horrible it is, can be a gift.
Yeah.
It can be a gift if we look for it. And you know what the
Yeah.
gift was for me? I mean, there's a lot of gifts, but one gift for us and our family is that we learned how to trust God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the gift. And the gift was we learned how to see God not just as Jehovah Jireh, the healer, but also as the comforter. And we
Yeah.
got to know him in the fellowship of his suffering. And bro, that's a whole other level of intimacy. When you get to know God in the fellowship of his suffering, and not just in the joy of
Right.
the other
Right.
stuff, but in the fellowship of his suffering,
That
man,
you would have.
when
Yeah. You wouldn't have
You
seen this. You wouldn't have experienced this if you didn't go through this, which is wild. Yeah.
No, you can know God as a healer, but you know what? If you want to know God as a healer, you got to be sick. If you want to know God as a
Yeah.
deliverer, you got to be bound. And
Yeah.
so we get these opportunities to know
Yeah.
God in a completely different way
Yeah.
and a deeper, more intimate way through
Yeah.
our pain. That was
Yeah.
a gift, and it is a gift every day.
Yeah.
Every day I choose to see it as a gift. I try to see it as a gift. Some days I
Yeah.
don't feel like it's a gift, but it
Yeah.
is. It's a
Yeah.
gift.
And I want to say, just before we move to the next topic, one thing that
Yeah.
I've learned so well is that God gives grace. Like, you could not imagine. Okay, listen, 5 years ago, if I would have said, "Hey, in 2020, 3 or whenever it was, your wife's you're pass away," right? Like, you would have had a mental breakdown, and you would have, you know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah,
couldn't imagine
absolutely.
that. But what's amazing is that God gives you the sufficient grace through
Mhm.
that season, right? People say, I could not imagine losing my child. I could not imagine losing my spouse. I could not imagine
Mhm.
this or that. And what's amazing to me is that God is so gracious and he loves you. If you're out there and you're wondering, where's God in these situations, right? Look back at the situation that you're sitting in maybe right now and ask yourself, would I have been able to get through that, right? Would you think that you can get through something like this? No, absolutely not. And that's the very hand of God, right? That is
Yep.
literally coming in and for sure giving you specific grace that you need for that one, moment that you need. So, which is amazing. And so, what I want to do right
Yes.
quick is, or unless you have
Well, let
something to
me
add to that really
yeah,
quick, but
I was just gonna add one thing to it, and then
yeah,
we'll move
for
on.
sure.
But there is there is abundant life and sufficient grace.
Right.
And, a lot of times we think that we should have abundant grace, but God gives us just enough, and it's just
Right.
enough to cover what we need when we
Yeah.
need it.
When we need it.
And
Yeah.
and and actually, it is that sufficient grace that brings abundant life.
Yeah.
And because life more abundantly is not about success in the way that we see it and the things that we think. No, no, abundant life is a deep, deep, deep walk with God. It's a
Yeah.
deep understanding of God. That is abundant life. It's not all the perks of having all the
Yeah.
wonderful things that you want. No, no. He gives us sufficient grace and allows us
Yeah.
to walk through it day to day, just enough to get us through so that we can live a life that's
Yeah.
more abundant, that's deeper and closer
Yeah.
to God and closer to the
Yeah.
heart of God. Anyway.
What's wild is to change subjects really quick. I was listening to Fox the other day, which I'm really trying to get away from the news, to be real honest with you, but it's kind of difficult for me.
I quit
Um,
watching it. I quit
I
watching
really
all of it.
need to. I really need to. But one thing that Kaylee McEnany, which we've done some work for her, and one thing that she said, which just blew my mind, and we hear this almost all the time, is that more people than ever are leaving the church now more than ever. And she gave a stat, which I don't want to quote it because I don't know if I fully remember it. But one thing that she said is that the church today is in a state that it's never been. That people are rapidly leaving the church. And you got to ask yourself why, right? Like, I think there's a lot of different reasons why, people are leaving the church, of course. And again, I want to make this blatantly clear. My heart is never to bash the church. The church saved my life. Jesus, right? The scripture calls that we be a part of a body of believers, right? As
Mhm.
uncomfortable as it can be, which we could get into a whole tangent with that.
Yeah.
Church is absolutely important. And I'll even say, just publicly now, I went through a season where I bashed my old church. Okay. I just put them on blast because I didn't agree with certain things. And I've
Mhm.
kind of come to a place now where, man, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't have done it in the way that I did. And, I've apologized to the pastor, for that. But I really still want to always stand true to who I am, and I want to stand true at a place where we're looking at a problem where people are rapidly leaving the church. I mean, when I go to Guatemala, right, and I'm talking to young adults and teenagers, and I'm asking them, "Hey, are you connected to a local church?" Almost every single one of them want nothing to do with the church. And when you ask every single one of them, "Why are you not part of a church?" it always comes down to the same exact thing. right? It's never about, man, the walls were blue and I like green walls, or it wasn't about the AC was too cold or too hot. It's never about even the music, right? I mean, a lot of times people will not go to church because it's not their style, but the biggest part is it's always been, I've been hurt. And specifically, I've been hurt by either the people within the church or I've been hurt by the leadership itself, right? And
Hmm.
and for me, that was my experience. I just saw leaders left and right that were pretty much peeing on each other. And what I mean by that is politically trying to rise up, and they were doing everything
Yeah.
that they could to be right next to the senior pastor, and they would literally do everything they possibly could to be right there. And for me, I got disgusted by it because for me, it hit close to me. It hit home to me because my mom wanted nothing to do with the church. I remember begging her to come see me in plays in Easter, and she barely didn't even
Mhm.
want to go to that because literally she
Mhm.
hated the church for the pure reason that people hurt her in the church and that
Yep.
leaders
Yep.
mishandled her, not sexually, not physically, but mishandled situations in the church. And so for you, it's not a shock, and I'm not going to speak for you, but it's not a shock of anyone who knows you of what you kind of went through in the past, couple of years, right? But that's one thing I wanted to speak to for a little bit to people out there that I want to make clear is that if you are hurt by the church in any way, the thing to do in that season is not to just stop going to church completely, right? Like I love Chipotle with a
Hmm.
passion. Okay.
Hmm.
But when I went to Chipotle off of 1960, it was a horrible experience. Okay. Does that stop me from going to Chipotle completely?
Right.
No. Right. And I
Mm.
think that that's what's happening is that people that I know that I see have gone to a church and they were hurt and they were abused and they were just the toxic culture that was allowed there spread like cancer, and it just
Mhm.
destroyed what was going on. And then these people, they got so fed up with it, and what pastors say is, hey, if you're getting hurt by a church, just don't stop loving Jesus, just move to another church, which is a fine idea for strong believers like you and I, right? Strong
Mhm.
believers like you and I that get hurt by a church, we kind of know, hey, if this church isn't following scripturally and they're not willing to repent and really get back on the right tone, we're just going to go and either A, start a church, or B, we'll go and just join another body of believers. That's not a big deal to us, right? But there are believers out there that are very immature Christians that will easily pull away from the church completely, which then pushes them down a whole
Mhm.
trail of leading away from Jesus, to where a couple years down the road, these people, I mean, I can't tell you how many pastors I follow. One of the
Mhm.
pastors that used to be a youth pastor at my church is not even a Christian anymore because he was
Mhm.
hurt by the church. And so I wanted you
Right.
to kind of, maybe if you want to share a little bit of your experience, you don't have to go into detail, but the goal of this is, again, not to bash the church, not to
Right.
blast people, but it's to really allow people listening in today to say, man, like I've been there too, and I've been hurt there too, and I didn't
Mhm.
know what to do with my hurt. And here's the other reality, Richie, is this is, we're still called to love people. We're
Right.
still called to love unconditionally the people who hurt us the
Mhm.
most. And so how do we do that? And
Mhm.
kind of share your story a little bit about, maybe, as much as you want to, and how to handle that.
Man, that's a whole 3 or 4 or 5, 10 episodes of a podcast. But, actually, we talk a lot about this, I'm plugging my podcast right now, but we talk a lot of
Yeah,
this
do it.
about this on Make Peace with War, my podcast, and specifically in the series that we're doing right now called Churchish. And we talk a lot about church hurt, about toxic leadership and all of that sort of thing. But I think first of all, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. We play a huge part in uh, in where we move, how we move forward, and so if you have gone through pain and hurt in the church, as a result of the church, then first of all, we've got to choose. You have to understand this. You have to understand that God is not the church and the church is not God. They are two different things. But because they are so closely linked together in our hearts and in our spirits, when somebody in the church hurts us, then we equate that to God hurting us. And it is not the same. And if we can recognize that early on, this wasn't God, this was people who purport to be men or women of God or purport to be children of God, they hurt me.
Right.
And one of my friends, Natalie, says, church hurt is really not so much church hurt as it is you're hurt by people in the church.
Right.
Because again, you got to recognize the difference between small C church and big C church. The big C church is the body of Christ.
Right.
And that is the body of Christ. Now, we will be hurt by people in the small C churches and the leaders in a small C church, the saints in a small C church, whatever, because they're human and because they are susceptible to the same things that we're susceptible to. And that kind of pain is going to happen. It's going to happen because you're dealing with humans, but
Right.
it is not God that is doing this.
Yeah.
And so if you can settle in your head early on, when you start to see things that don't seem right in the church, this is people. This is not God.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's going to be easier for you when we get to the end of this situation that you haven't walked away from God. You
Yeah.
may have walked away from Chipotle and didn't like it, right? Like the 1960 Chipotle. But you were cool with going to another Chipotle because it was still good, right?
Right.
My wife, though, when she was a kid, she ate pancakes and choked on the pancake and regurgitated it and whatever. And from that moment on, never ate a pancake again in her life. And because it just brought back those feelings, right?
Yeah.
And so, but did she stop eating? She didn't stop eating.
Right.
So sometimes we can go back to the same thing, right? Or similar, something similar. Sometimes people go and do something that looks completely different. And so there's a lot of different models. There's a lot of different models of church. If you got hurt by a certain model of church, and every time you go to a church that's like that, it brings back a bunch of bad memories, and you can't survive that, find a different model.
Right.
But just stay in the church. There's house church model. That's the model of church that I want to be a part of. But that's just me. That's not necessary for everybody, but it's something that I enjoy. There's house church model. There's the the attractional church model. There's the liturgical kind of. There's all kinds of different models of church. As long as they're theologically accurate, then you're going to be okay. Find one that fits. If you don't like that flavor anymore, go to a different flavor. That's cool. But you've got to keep the relationship with God. That is key. That is key to all of it. And God is not the church. The church is not God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to ask a more direct question as well, because obviously you've been a believer probably longer than I've been alive. Just kidding, but you've been a believer. And one thing that I struggled with was I was one of the pastors at this church, at a church, and I saw some things that everyone does, selfish things, right? Like you can't. I've learned as a believer, and especially someone who works for a church, you really just are going to destroy yourself if every turn you take, you're looking for something wrong and you're trying to handle it. I've really done a good job lately of just saying, hey, when I see things that aren't going the way I think they should go, I'm just going to stay quiet and really allow the Lord to help, right? And really allow the Lord to do his work. But I'm also a type 8 personality. I'm a guy who stands for justice. I mean, that's why I do, missions to Guatemala, is because I want these kids who don't have food to have food. I think, the justice in me stands for what's right. And so it's very hard for me to be a part of a church and me openly see them walking in a way I know 100% isn't how scripture says we are. And so for you, what is your suggestions to people like me, right, that see things that are happening? I mean, you and I have talked. you started seeing some things in your world for a little bit, and
Hmm.
you called
Yeah.
them out and you were pushed out. And that's one thing I'll tell to anybody watching this today is just know that you will be pushed out. You will be canceled
Well,
the moment you start
yes.
speaking out.
Oh, yo,
So
for real, for real. So
yeah,
you have to understand the costs of fighting the battle, right? And
right,
but listen, there is a difference between anger and righteous indignation. Okay?
right,
And righteous indignation does not mean that you are righteous. It means that you're indignant about the righteousness of the church and
right,
the things that are not working
right,
properly in them. So to sit quietly when you see the things that are gone, to sit quietly is this has been the mo for churches for a long time when
right.
and we got to be really careful here. I have to be really careful here because this is not like you're going to have a free for all every time you disagree with something that the pastor does.
Yeah,
That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is if there is character issue, if there's character integrity issue that is happening and you're seeing lots of people hurt as a result of that,
right.
uh, number one, you can't if you stay silent, then you become complicit in that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so you've got a couple choices. You can either address it with the people or you can go, but do something, right? Don't
right,
just sit there. Don't just
right.
and the other thing I would say though is don't be an Absalom, right? An Absalom where you walk away from the leadership and you talk about the leadership over here to a bunch of people, but you never actually talk to the leader. Absalom was
Yeah,
was the guy that would go into the courts when David was grieving instead of David being there, the king.
yeah. He just went
Absalom
to
would come and take his time, right? He would take his place, and
yeah,
he would say, hey, they would say, "Hey, I don't like the way this is being done. I don't like the way this is being done." And he was like, "Yeah, if I was the king, I would do it this way." No, no, you can't do that either. And that's one of the reasons why I left where I was. Okay,
yeah.
um, I wasn't fired, but they definitely didn't want me there. Okay,
I've been
and
in
so
that
I
exact situation, by the way. All right.
so so
Yeah,
I left out of I left out of my own free will, but they didn't want me there
yeah,
because I did. This is what I did. Uh, I saw I saw some unhealth, um, and to be clear, it doesn't mean I'm fully healthy. I'm not. I never have been. I've
right.
got my own issues, but I saw consistent degradation of health in leadership, and I had promised years before to the pastor that if I ever saw anything, he asked me to, if you ever see anything in this way, I need you to come and tell me. And I said, okay,
Yeah,
I promise I will. And I did. And I had a conversation. A few years
yeah,
later, I had a conversation. Hey, this is where
yeah,
we are. This is what I'm seeing, and it's not healthy, and it needs to be addressed. At that point, he wasn't ready for that and didn't want it anymore. And he turned it back on me and said, "You're the unhealthy one, and everything else is uh, is
yeah,
all about you." And so, um, did about 6 months later, and I was like, "No, my voice isn't valued. I don't need to stay here because that voice is
yeah.
not what they want anymore. They want other
Right,
voices around them, not that one." And
right.
so I left. I chose to leave, but but I did do what I could, and I tried to do it biblically. Go to that person and talk to that person
Yeah,
and address it there.
right.
It didn't work, but that's not on me. I went
Yeah,
ahead and left. And so I think I've also had lots of people that will come to me when they're leaving a church and they'll say, "Hey, I've got an exit interview coming up. Do I say anything about why I'm leaving, or do I just try to make it smooth?" I'm like, "No, please say something, because
yeah,
at some point, if they hear it enough, then the onus of responsibility for change is on them." And that is one of the greatest things about leadership. One of the best leadership principles that you can have is a is a culture of feedback, right? A true
yeah,
culture of feedback where you can say, "Hey, this is what needs to happen. You're not growing in this area. This is what needs to
right,
happen." And
right.
but it needs to flow both ways. It can't just be
Yeah,
down. It's also got to be up. And so you've got to be able to be in that kind of. So one of the most loving things that you can do is to go to somebody and say, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing. Um, and this is where I'm worried. I'm concerned. That's the most loving thing you can do. So to stay silent is actually is being complicit, but
Right.
to actually say something to the right people in the right spirit is is the key.
Yeah.
And then the responsibility is in their hands to change or not. And if they choose
Yeah.
not to change, then as the Bible says, you shake the dust off your feet and
Yeah.
you move on. You don't cast your pearl before
Yeah.
swine. You move on,
Yeah.
and you say, okay, I did what I thought I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
They have the responsibility of knowledge now. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to move on, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah. And that's where for me, like I struggled a great deal because I saw things that I did not like that scripturally did not make sense. And you see, money going places that you kind of question. And you just see, people being in positions that should have never been in positions. And I'm sitting here saying, man, am I just this righteous, jerk that just, it thinks I'm just right every, step I take. And I struggled with it. But I started seeing people, without me even saying anything, say the same stuff, right? And leaving the same, literally like leaving because of the same reasonings. And for me, I just got to a point where I just got so fed up with it, even after I bring it up to leadership. And I'm like, man, what is happening? Like, why are we allowing this to happen? And it's almost like you look
Mhm.
at that pastor and they don't care at all, right? Because, which is so sad because the pastors, all over the place that are falling, that are allowing this toxic culture to take place, right? They're kind of in this pressurized, environment where I get it. Like looking out, I'm like, man, I fully see how difficult it is for you to, you know, pull out of that certain situation. And so for me, what I really struggled with was looking at a lot of my friends and people that went to the church, really seeing them. That's what freaked me out was like, my gosh, I don't want them to be hurt. And so do I
Right,
blast it from the mountaintops and basically
right.
say like, what's going on and this is not right? Or do I just
Mhm.
quote unquote silently leave? And
Well,
I've
this is
struggled.
the difference. This is the difference between bitterness and righteous indignation, right? Bitterness says, I they hurt me.
Right,
Righteous indignation says, I don't want them to hurt other people.
right,
And there's a difference because if we're self-centered and we're thinking about all the pain that we went through and that I'm mad and we're just
right,
lashing out, then that's bitterness and that's
right.
resentment. But
Yeah,
if we're saying, you know what, this how can we learn from this pain and how can I help to keep other people from it? Then that's a
yeah,
different kind of thing.
yeah,
And it's a whole different. The posture of your heart is everything in this situation, and you have
yeah.
to daily check it, right? Every day
Right,
you have to
right.
die to that, right? Paul said, "I die
Yeah,
daily." It's a reminder
yeah,
every day we have to die to that. Um, but yeah, so I think that's a big key to it. I think you have to recognize the other thing I would say too is if it was an isolated incident and you were hurt in an isolated incident, I think you need to really really do everything that you can to have grace and to give
right,
and give forgiveness and all of that sort of
right,
thing. It's when it's a pattern that it becomes a problem. And when
right,
we start to see a pattern and we start to see more and more people hurt as a result of
right.
the same thing, then we've got
Yeah,
an issue. Then we've
yeah,
got a like a spiritual leadership issue that needs to be addressed.
yeah,
The Bible says, "Out of the mouth of two or three, let every word be established." So
right.
if I'm the only one that was really hurt, it could have been unintentional. It could have been a mistake,
Right,
and you just got hurt in the process, and I'm
right.
sorry, and I hate that for you,
Yeah,
but don't assume that it's all like that all the time. But
right.
if you are just one of many, and many have been dealing with the same issue, and you see people leaving all over the
Yeah,
place, and you see several people having the same exact story,
yeah,
and the story is concerning, then we've got an issue that needs to be
yeah,
addressed.
yeah.
And
No, I
so
agree.
does that make sense?
No, 100%. And one thing, because I want to make sure that we end within the hour, but one thing that I would say too is, also for those of you out there, I had a really bad problem of, the church that I was, hurt by, right? it was a family deal, right? And I kind of had this hatred towards the family church, right? Of the pastor and then his kids, and then of course they're in those positions, and I kind of created this hatred. And my wife and I ended up meeting this sweet family, and we ended up going to their church, and it literally, this is where we are now. We're moved out to Willis for it, and one thing that we realized was like it was a family church. Like literally, the daughter, not even the son, right? The daughter is one of the pastors of the church that we go to, and the family was so deep into it that God was really showing me, no, don't hate the family church, right? Like some people can handle that very well. And the family, the church I go to, Family Faith Willis, the family works harder than anybody in that church. Sarah, right? Sarah Hackelman works harder than anybody. She's going to be serving literally every single time the door is open. She's there serving. And it's a completely different vibe than what we really saw at the previous. And my thing too is just like what you said, I've really said, God, like, I just want to have a gracious heart. The people, like, and I still say this to people all the time, the church that I left, people have asked me like, well, what do I do? Whatever. And I said, listen, those are amazing people. They really are. Like, they changed my life. Right. They just, for me, like, hopefully they did get better. And maybe the Lord did do some stuff in their life and their church that I had nothing to do with, right? And that I don't even know what's happening there now. Maybe they are on a completely different level. I don't even know. I've kind of ousted myself, and so no, I think it's so good. Well, listen, tell people about your podcast.
Let me say one more thing. Sure. One more thing to that. I think let me see if I can remember what it was I was going to say. Oh yes, yeah. So here's the big deal, guys. Don't fight people, fight spirits.
Right.
This is what's so important, because we can, when we're hurt at a church or whatever, we have a tendency to want to just fight that entity and fight back and hurt them and make sure, I don't want to see them succeed. I don't want to do that. Blah, 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 blah. No. Like, recognize the spirits, discern the spirits that were behind that.
Right.
And address the spirits, because that you'll find that spirit in another church, and you'll find it in another church, and you'll find it in another church. So that's what, when I have conversations, you're talking about our podcast, my podcast, when I have conversations with the podcast, I want to do everything that I can, not to just focus specifically on a person, but to focus on the spirits that are driving, that are in the church today, that are driving a lot of these issues, and that are causing people to run away from the church, because it's a culture, a church culture issue. It's not just that individual hurt me. No, it's a church culture issue that needs to be addressed. So fight the spirits. Don't fight the person. Don't fight the person. I hope that makes sense.
100%. Where can people find more about what you're doing? Just tell us how we can be connected with you. Do you want to give us any insight as well? I feel like Fox News right now. You want to give us any insight of what you're going to be doing here in any time recent or shortly, or what's going on?
Well, yeah, man. So first of all, you can follow me on social media at the Richie Allen, TheRichieAllen, the Richie Allen on any of the platforms for the most part. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, but also YouTube. Make Peace with War is my podcast, and it's on any of the podcast platforms. Make Peace with War, and that's where we do the churches series and all of that sort of thing. But that's on YouTube. That's on all the podcast platforms, so if you like this conversation, you'll enjoy those kinds of things. As far as what else is going on in the future, right now, my wife and I wanted to start a church of house churches, and that's something that I still want to do. And she wanted me to continue that as well. So we're in the process of doing that, and we've taken our sweet time, because I'm not in a rush to do something. I want God to allow. I want to give the Holy Spirit time to do whatever it is that He needs to do in my heart during this time of loss. But we've hit the 6-month mark.
Sorry, hit a button.
Scared me half to death. But I feel like it's. I feel like we're in a place where we're going to start moving forward with the Table HTX, and so you can follow that at the Table HTX, and so we're moving forward with that.
And is there any way that I don't know what's going on, lately with you taking care of your family. I haven't even really, I've been really careful not to like get into your business too much. But is there any assistance or anything that people can help with that? I mean, and I know that you probably don't even like talking about this, but I don't even know how you're taking care of your children, and what you're doing in that case, if there's family involved or not. But is there any way that we as body of believers can get behind you in this time where it is so recent? Are you
I
doing
appreciate that,
anything
man.
like that? Because I definitely want to make sure that people who follow me, have an opportunity to bless you as well. And if you could like tell us a little bit about how you are taking care of your family now and what your plan is and what your goals are with that.
Yeah. Well, where I'm at right now, what the last year, 2022, was a wash. I have a ministry consulting company, but
Mhm.
I stopped doing that because of taking care of heaven. And so after that, now I'm trying to start a new business, but we haven't got it up yet. I am starting a new business, but we haven't got it up
Sure.
yet and running yet. So we're just kind of in a weird space right now as far as provision. But God has provided; He's kept us afloat, and I'm grateful for that. Um, but I mean, if you want to give anything or anything like that, you can go to the htx.com, and there's a give link there, and there's a drop down that allows for Richie Allen Ministries. And it's
Okay.
nonprofit, so it's tax deductible. But
Okay.
you can do that. But I mean, prayers
Yeah.
are the biggest thing for us. It just
So good.
continued prayers to ask for
Yeah.
direction and guidance. And I want to be able to parent these kids really well, and
Yeah.
for them to be okay. And so
So good.
that's my prayer. So, man,
So
thanks for
good.
letting
Well,
me be on the podcast,
always.
bro.
Well, listen,
It's
everyone
an
who's
honor.
watching, if this blessed you today, I want to ask, share this on your timeline. It would mean the world, just to get this word out and really how to be a blessing in your own life and wherever you're at in your life and what you're going through. God is good and He's faithful and He is going to do an amazing work through whatever hell you may go through, as we can see with
Yep.
Richie, what's going on with him. But thank you all so much for watching. And Richie, thank you so much for joining, and we will see you soon.
Thanks.
See you. Bye-bye.
Audio Jungle.